Hey guys, so the graphics card came in. This is the GTX 690, which I put in my rig about 2.5 years ago. So it is being replaced with this, which is a GTX 980 Ti. I've already used it for about 2 days now. I want to give my impressions, my early impressions. I wouldn't really necessarily call this like a full review. I'm not going to throw a whole bunch of numbers or anything like that to you. I'm just going to speak from the perspective of an owner of a GTX 690 and whether or not you should upgrade to a GTX 980 Ti. Now, this is a question where there's plenty of asks on Reddit or Steam's game forums. This questions have been thrown around a lot, asking, would it make any sense to upgrade from a pretty beefy graphics card as it is to a new generation? Now, let me just talk about the specs real quick on both of these cards. For those who don't know, the GTX 690 is essentially two 680s on a single board. So underneath each of these little plastic windows and heat sinks is an actual fully enabled 680, slightly underclocked. I don't remember the exact number, but it's very easy to actually overclock them far beyond the original stock clocks of 680. I've done it a handful of times. All it does is produce a shitload of heat, and yes, you do get some better performance. And it's all cooled by one fan, and you can see behind the fan, you see these little ridges, and what that does is it helps guide the airflow onto both heat sinks. The problem with the design of this graphics card is that this is open on the inside of the case, so as air is being drawn in here, it's being expelled into the case, as well as outside the case in the front with this very small exhaust vent. Now, you could SLI two of these suckers, so it would essentially be a quad SLI setup. Now, I had that choice. You know, I could have actually, it would have been cheaper for me to buy a second 690 and thrown it in my case, but the problem with SLI is it's not a perfect system, and doing anything beyond a two-way SLI setup is completely pointless for gaming. For computational work, I can see that being kind of a selling point, but again, like I can't imagine what kind of workload you would use, especially considering that this card is starting to show its age. This card only has 2 gigabytes of video RAM. Now, it's actually 4 all combined, but there's 2 for each of the 680s that are on there. A little fun fact or history lesson: when the 690 came out, it first originated for $1,000, and yes, I paid $1,000 for this. And I had, at the time, I had a choice between this and a Titan, the original Titan. And I noticed that in a lot of games, this card was beating out the Titan, which is why I bought this one over the Titan. Now, this came out prior to the Titan, but I believe the Titan came out like a few months after, and I bought it around that time. Now, this was the first card to have this design. It was the first card to have the whole glowing GeForce GTX logo, the full metal, the see-through plastic windows, the magnesium alloy, and as well as aluminum, which I don't pronounce it like everyone else does. Now, let's bring on the 980 Ti. Now, 980 Ti is basically a Titan X with 2 SMs disabled, so you have 22 out of 24. It also has half the memory. So if you look on the top, you see these like open spaces, and that's where the additional 6 gigs would have been, which means this is essentially a Titan X PCB, just with missing RAM. And the case is a little bit different for the Titan X. This is all the same material as this. Now, when I first unboxed this, my first reaction was I felt like this was plastic. I don't know. And it's that kind of thing where after a while I'm like, okay, this is metal, but then I'm like, it's not metal. It probably is metal. It just feels different from this, and that's probably because they probably went a little cheaper on the materials, and it definitely shows. I mean, whatever. It still looks really nice. Now, I bought a reference design versus those custom aftermarket things that EVGA and all the others come out with, because honestly, I think this looks really nice. The attention to detail, and it really looks like you're buying something expensive, which is why I like the stock cooler. Now, I think, honestly, from my initial impressions here, or initial experience here, this card pushes a lot more air through it than this one does. I mean, when I put my hand, even if I'm like about that far, it feels like a lot of air. It really is very hot. I feel like it's a hair dryer just blowing scorching hot air at your hand. Here, it really didn't feel that hot, and it also, it really didn't feel like much air was even coming out of the back, which is why this card ran very hot. This card was running at about 86 degrees Celsius, and that's with stock clocks. I never really overclocked this all that much because I never felt like I had to. Now, I noticed in a few games that the 690 was starting to have some trouble, and that's Far Cry 3, for some reason, has very shit frames per second. Now, I noticed an immediate improvement. When I plugged this card in and I fired up Far Cry 3, same driver, same power, same everything, same monitor, same settings, I noticed right away that the game was running buttery smooth and there was no hiccups at all, where there was plenty of them with this card. The same is said for Grand Theft Auto 5. Grand Theft Auto 5, I had to turn down some settings when I used the 690 because of its limited VRAM. It only has 2, where this has 6. And I cranked those up on here, and this card still ran smoother than the GTX 690. So it seems like removing SLI, and it's just not a perfect system, removing that out of the equation and moving all into one single GPU seems to have an effect on some games. Some games are actually running a lot smoother. I'm not saying faster, smoother on this card versus the 690. Getting into noise. Now, this is something stupid that's really pissing me off right now, and I'm working on trying to get this resolved. Now, the 690 makes a sound if you push it hard. Like if you use Furmark or you use 3D Mark, if you run 3D Mark benchmarks on here, you'll hear this very high-pitched whine sound. And it's only during those tests. During regular gaming, if I have VSync off, you'll hear it. If I have VSync on, you won't. This card, it doesn't matter. It makes a whine whenever you're playing any sort of game. The same games that are played on both Far Cry 3, this card whines, that card doesn't. I played Metal Gear Solid 5, came free with this card. It whines on this card, doesn't whine on that card. And it actually runs nicer on this card. They're using the same settings, same VSync, same everything. It just runs smoother for one. It doesn't have those weird hiccups. And it, it just makes this weird fucking noise. And I looked it up. Some people are saying that they just request an RMA. I mean, I bought this from Amazon. It's only 3 days old. I'm sure I can get Amazon to just ship me a replacement. I'm not too sure if I'm going to do it or not. Now, the jump in performance between these two cards really doesn't feel all that much improvement. As I said, the only real improvement you get from jumping from a 690 to a 980 Ti is you're getting the additional VRAM, which a lot of games nowadays are starting to take advantage of 4 gigs or more. So it's kind of great to have that additional memory in here, whereas the 2 gigs is really starting to become a limiting factor. Games like Watch Dogs, for instance, I couldn't crank them up that high because it required 4 gigs of RAM. for the higher settings. I had to have it on the absolute lowest settings to compensate for the fact that this card didn't have the available RAM. That's no longer an issue moving on to a 980 Ti. So yeah, you'll get smoother performance because SLI is no longer a limiting factor either. It's better to just buy the fastest single GPU card than it is to buy two slower cards and SLI them, because you're going to experience micro stutter, you're going to experience some jitter, and you're also going to experience hiccuping from time to time. When I was playing the Black Ops 3 beta, I had to turn off SLI. If it was on SLI, I was getting in the teens of frames per second, even on the lowest settings. Once I turned off SLI, the game ran fine. So that being said, it really comes down to, are you running games that take advantage of more than 2 gigs of VRAM? Because in some games, like for instance Tomb Raider, I ran the benchmark on both of these cards. Same driver, same everything. They looked exactly the same. 122 frames per second max is what I'm getting out of both cards. One's in SLI, one's not. So now it's that kind of thing where instead of being an upgrade, it becomes a side grade. And that's what I feel like this is. I really feel like the GTX 980 Ti is a 690, but in one GPU. That's what it feels like. And that's actually pretty damn impressive, though. It's impressive that a card that I purchased 2.5 years ago has held on to its performance crown so long that it's taken up until now, up until what, 2-3 months ago when they released this card, it's taken up until now for a single GPU to match the performance of a dual GPU card. And that's pretty impressive. It's impressive how long it lasted, but it also becomes a disappointment. I'm disappointed in the performance because this card set the precedence that, okay, this is what I can expect out of a single card. You know, yeah, I got spoiled. I got spoiled by SLI. And I was expecting the 50% boost that I was seeing in a lot of benchmarks performed by others. I was expecting to see that, but I'm not. I'm not seeing that substantial 50% boost in performance. What's kind of funny is that on the back of the Zotac box, because yeah, I bought Zotac's version of this, and I'll show you, it says, where does it say it? Let's see, okay, here. GeForce 980 Ti delivers 3 times the performance and 3 times the memory of previous generation cards. And if you read the asterisk, it's GeForce GTX 680. So they're claiming that this card, 980 Ti, is 3 times faster than a 680. I think that's total bullshit, because this is 2 680s. And I'm not seeing that 50% improvement, which would basically say, hey, yeah, this is 3 times faster. It's not. What I'm noticing, and I think it's very rare exceptions, this card is faster. Maybe there's something wrong with what I'm doing. So, you know, that's why this is not a review. This is just my first impressions of this card. I am starting to get the buyer's remorse, honestly, because that was an additional $650 I really honestly didn't have to spend. I could have just kept this card and called it a day. So I'm kind of torn. Yes, I'm getting smoother gameplay experience out of this card because, again, there's no micro stutter, and the additional video RAM allows me to turn on settings that I never was able to do before. But I don't know. So I have to ask you guys, if you're in this situation, what would you do? Would you return the card? I'm still within the return policy, or and actually go back to the 690, or should I just stick to it? I mean, yeah, in the future, I could always buy a second 980 Ti and SLI that, and that gives me an additional 70% boost over its current performance, and yeah, that will totally smoke this old card. But that costs even more money. And just to, you know, add, anyone that says, hey, why didn't you just get a Titan X? The performance difference between this card and a Titan X is really not all that much. So to me, it wasn't worth the additional $350. One thing I also like about this card is it has full-size display ports. Up until now, I was forced to use this adapter. So I have a display port to my Samsung curved monitor, but the mini display port kept falling out. Like, if I went behind my computer case to plug something in, it would just nudge this ever so slightly and the picture would disappear, and it would cause my games to actually crash if I did so. But it's nice to have a full-size display port because there is a button that you have on here. So you have to push the button and it releases these hooks. So it actually locks in place and you don't have to worry about it coming loose. So that's a good thing, but is that worth $650? Hell no. So I don't know what you guys think. Do you think I should sell it or keep it? I'm still trying to make that decision. Now, I'm going to keep on playing some games. I'm going to quite possibly have an impressions video on Metal Gear Solid 5 because I have a lot to say about it. So yeah, take care guys. Look out for future videos.